Tucker, what are you going to tell us about?
Well, I'm going to talk about children who report memories of past lives. And this was work that has been going on at UVA for over 50 years. Division of Perceptual Studies officially started in 1967, so we've now celebrated 50 years. But Ian Stevenson, who started our division, actually started studying these cases in the early 1960s. And we have continued on even after he is no longer with us. And we've now studied over 2,500 cases from around the world, basically, of young children who report a memory of a past life. And what they typically do is describe a recent, ordinary life that often ended violently or ended when the person was young. And Ian spent many hours and traveled many miles trying to find these cases, and mostly found them in Asia because in cultures with a belief in reincarnation, people talk about them more. But now, with the internet and with people knowing about our work, we hear from American families all the time. So I'll give you a couple of examples, and this first one is one that we talked about yesterday. So we got a letter one day from this mother in Oklahoma, and she said that she and her husband were just ordinary people. Her husband was a police officer, and she worked in the county clerk's office. But for the last year, their 5-year-old boy, Ryan, had talked about a past life in Hollywood. And he would cry about Hollywood, wanting his mom to take him back there. So to try to help him kind of process this stuff, she decided to go to the public library and check out some books on Hollywood. And they were looking through one day when they came to a picture from an old movie called Night After Night. And Ryan pointed to one of the men in the picture and said, "Hey, Mama, that's George. We did a picture together." And he pointed to another one of the men and said, "And Mama, that's me. I found me." Well, the first person he pointed to was George Raft, who was quite a well-known actor back in his day. But the other man he pointed to that he said he had been was an extra with no lines in the movie. So Ryan's mom wrote to me to see if I could help figure out who this guy was. So I went to Oklahoma and I talked with the parents, I talked with Ryan, and then afterwards, as we were trying to figure out who this person was, Ryan's mom was emailing me sometimes on a daily basis with all these details that Ryan was giving about his past life. He was describing quite a life that, to be honest, I thought was rather unlikely for an extra with no lines in a movie. Eventually, with the help of a Hollywood archivist, we were able to figure out who this guy was. This archivist, she went to the library of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, got all the materials on the movie Night After Night, and there was one picture that included an identification of this guy, and he was a fellow named Marty Martin, who died in 1964. It turned out that Marty Martin did have quite a life. So Ryan said how he had danced on stage in New York, and Marty Martin danced on Broadway. Ryan said he then went to Hollywood and worked in the movies, which Marty Martin did, mostly working on dancing in movies. He said that he then worked for an agency, and Marty Martin started a successful talent agency. In fact, Ryan said it was an agency where people changed their names, and then Marty Martin worked at a talent agency. Ryan said how he had seen the world from big boats and talked about visiting Paris. Marty Martin and his wife went to Europe on the Queen Mary, and we have pictures of them in Paris. Ryan said he had a big house with a swimming pool, which Marty Martin did, and Ryan said that the street address had the word rock or mount in it, and Marty Martin lived on North Roxbury. Ryan also said one time that he didn't understand why God would let you get to be 61 and then make you come back again as a baby. which is sort of an interesting philosophical question on its own, but we got Marty Martin's death certificate, which said that he was 59. But then I talked with his daughter and with his stepson, who both said, no, he was actually 61. So I looked into it, and I found 3 census records, 2 marriage listings, and a passenger list that all gave ages for Marty Martin that meant, in fact, he was 61 when he died and not 59. And altogether, we verified that over 50 of Ryan's statements matched with Marty Martin's life. Another example that I will tell you about is a recent case that I studied, a little boy that I'll call Stephen. He was also 5 years old. When he started talking about how he had been a soldier who died in a war and that it was in the jungle, and his parents asked him if it was Vietnam, and he said yes. And then he gave a last name, which was an unusual last name, and the state where he was from. So his mom went on the Vietnam Memorial website and found that, in fact, there was a soldier killed with that name from that state who had been killed in Vietnam. She pulled up pictures of a bunch of the people who had been killed, and when she got to the one of him, the little boy said, "That's me." So she didn't do any more research. She wrote to me to let me know what Stephen was saying. So then I did do a little more research online. I got a subscription to a online newspaper collection, did a little sort of detective work. And when I went to see the family, I brought some pictures with me. Now, I didn't want to overwhelm a 5-year-old little boy with lineups of pictures, so what I did was show him pairs of pictures where one of the pictures was from this man's life and the other one wasn't. So for instance, I showed him a picture of the man's high school and then a different high school, and he picked the correct one. I showed him pictures of 2 houses, and again, he picked the correct one. So then after that visit, I continued to do online detective work. I also wrote to the man's sister, and I heard back from his niece, the sister's daughter, and she sent me some family photos. So then I sent some more pairs of pictures to Stephen's mom, and the good thing about these tests, when she showed them to Stephen, was that she didn't know which was the right picture either. So there was no chance that he was picking up on cues from anything as he looked at the pairs. Now, altogether, we showed him 8 pairs of pictures. A couple of them he didn't make a choice on, but for the others, he was 6 out of 6. Now, along with the knowledge that these kids seem to have about a past life, a lot of them also show emotions and behaviors that seem linked. So I mentioned Ryan crying about Hollywood, and we hear this all the time of kids sometimes crying on a daily basis about missing their family, begging to be taken to their family. For the kids where the previous person died violently, a lot of them will have nightmares repeatedly about that death. So there's a well-known American case where a little boy from the time of his 2nd birthday started having horrible nightmares multiple times a week of a plane crash. And as the case developed, it became clear that he had memories of a particular pilot who was killed during World War II. Also with the violent death cases, a lot of them will, the kids will show phobias, intense fear toward the mode of death. And this seems particularly true in drowning cases, where these kids will just be intensely afraid of being put in water. And also, there are cases where, and Ian Stevenson was really interested in these and studied several hundred of them. There are cases where the children will be born with birthmarks or even birth defects that match wounds, usually fatal wounds, on the body of the previous person. So for instance, there was one little boy where the previous person had been killed by a shotgun blast to the side of his head, The man's neighbor said he mistook his neighbor for a rabbit and shot him in the side of the head with a shotgun. And then this little boy was born with just a stump for an ear and an underdeveloped right side of his face. Ian also listed 18 cases where the children were born with 2 birthmarks, ones that matched both the entrance wound and the exit wound on the body of the previous person. So with all this, these cases, I think provide pretty good evidence that something is going on, that there is this carryover from the past life. But I have never argued that these cases mean that we all reincarnate, that we all come back here. In fact, you can make the case that these are exceptional cases because the previous person typically died violently or died young, came back quickly with intact memories. So maybe the usual pattern for most of us is not that we come back here, but we may have all kinds of different types of existence after we die. But regardless, I do think that these cases contribute, along with near-death experiences and the other things, to a good body of evidence that there are times where consciousness does survive after the body dies, and in these cases attaches to new life and then has a new life here. So that's what I think.
Well, I'm fascinated by the idea that they might happen to some people, and there's a correlation with bad endings, bad deaths, isn't there? But that's not always the case, because in this one with the agent, there's a 40-year gap between the guy dying and the child being born. So just say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and with that World War II case, there's a 50-year gap there.
Yeah.
But the average interval is only 4.5 years. So it's typical that they come back very quickly. I mean, there are always exceptions pretty much to anything. But it does seem that for many of the cases, you can make a reasonable argument that the previous person had sort of unfinished business, and that it might have led them to stay attached to this realm or this world and then be reborn and start another life.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.